Welcome to the very first episode of our Cawa Podcast. My name is Navjot Gurm. I am the co-founder of Compassion for Animal Welfare, also known as Cawa. So today we will explore a deeply emotional topic, pet loss. We'll cover essential aspects such as understanding pet loss, navigating the stages of grief, coping with the empty house syndrome, comparing pet grief to human grief, and strategies for self-care and healing. Welcome to our podcast, Steve.
Thank you, Navjot.
So, as we know, our topic today is pet loss, and we know that losing a pet can be one of the most gut-wrenching experiences.
Mm-hmm.
So why don't we begin our conversation with understanding what exactly pet loss is?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It's interesting because when we were talking a couple of weeks ago, the same day that we had a phone conversation, later that afternoon, my family and I had to put our youngest dog down. I say youngest, she was 13 years old.
Yeah.
And she was a wonderful little dog. And it was hard. And you said, oh, do you want to talk about this today? It's hard. I said, no, you know what? I do want to talk about her because it was a case where she was not eating and she was not drinking, losing weight, but thankfully she wasn't in any pain.
Yeah.
She was still trying to get up and down stairs, the same day. But it was best that she see the veterinarian that she had been with for years.
Yeah.
And it was very, very peaceful when she, my wife and I took her to the vet, the hospital, and everybody was very empathetic.
Yeah.
And it was wonderful. And so it was a very nice, peaceful. They did ask us a question that caught me a little off guard. And that was, how would you like to remember her by having her ashes in some sort of like a little stone urn?
Yeah.
And my wife and I looked at each other and said, you know what? I think that would be a great idea.
A little memory of her. Yeah.
Absolutely. And that's right. Keeping the memory of her alive, because her name was Maggie. She was a little Cavalier Spaniel, about 25 pounds. And I adored her. We all adored her, but she was my little girl.
Of course.
My daughter wouldn't want me to hear me say that. But and having that memory of her, and what we are doing, what I'm going to do soon, is to put together a collage, make it into maybe like a slideshow of sorts, an electronic slideshow. And we'll just, we'll play it on our big screen TV one night and just have the memories of what the first day we brought her home.
Sort of reminisce that time spent with her. Yeah.
My daughter held her in a little purse, just her head poking out.
So cute.
It's really nice. And thankfully there were no major illnesses or injuries with her.
Yeah.
And living to be 13, in fact, that breed normally lives to maybe 8 or 9, 10 maybe. There's a lot of issues with that particular breed, and she was healthy right up until the last week or 10 days.
Yeah.
So that does our heart really good, and we know that she was loved.
Of
fiercely.
course
She was loved.
Of course. I remember our conversation, and one of my biggest worries was that I brought up this topic and you were going through it. And though I'm very thankful that you still decided to go ahead and do this, and that does take a lot of courage.
Thank you.
So thank you for that. And I remember telling you I don't even entertain that thought. I also have a 13-year-old, and it was funny because my dog had turned 13 the same day when we had that conversation.
Right. You told me that, yeah.
So it was kind of like I'm seeing my own dog decline. So even though I'm saying that I'm preparing myself for that time, I really don't want to think about it. You know what I mean? It's not
It's hard to actually say you're preparing. The day will come.
Of course.
We have another dog, a big guy, like over 100 pounds, a big golden retriever. His name is Cody. And he's 13 years old also, doing well, but showing those signs of struggling a bit to get up and down the stairs. And it's hard to watch. But if we had 6 months, a year, or 2 or 3 more years with her, him, we're just going to enjoy it as much as we
Exactly.
can. Keep him active, feed him really good food, do the best we can.
Exactly. And that's what we're doing with our little guy. His name is Tyson. He is, he's a little anxiety ball. So he gets anxious at every little noise. He hates the rain, the thunder, the TV. So we had to sort of come up with a plan, work with a behaviorist, and put him on medication. And then create a safe space for him in our house so that his quality of life was better. So it's not to, we often humanize dogs, right? And I was doing the same thing. And I said, oh, poor thing. He's just sitting upstairs. Meanwhile, we're all downstairs enjoying our life. But he didn't want anything to do with that because there was too much. I have a toddler. So there's so much noise around him. And he doesn't want any part of that. So, we do our morning walks and then I just let him be.
That's good.
I don't bother him. If he wants to come downstairs on his own will, spend time, to me, that's
his choice.
Exactly. And I feel so honored in that moment. I'm just like, oh, okay, you chose to be with us today, But yeah, and I think that's really important to understand that when our pets and their health is declining, they're getting to that point where they can no longer be their puppy selves again. You're kind of losing them.
Absolutely.
Day by day, right?
Absolutely.
Until that last step. So to really understand that loss is not just the death of a pet, but it's also in the process of getting there.
Yes.
Right?
For sure.
And then how do we cope with that? Like what are some of the things that you guys or the family had to do?
Well, it's interesting because I in a number of different mental health workshops that I run, I talk about grief, and there's a model, the Ross Kubler model, and I don't really go into too much detail when I'm in my workshops, but I do talk about the idea that everybody's grief is different.
Yeah.
My daughter, my wife, my son, my friends, who knew and loved the dogs. They all have different ways of processing that grief, right? And mentioning that model, it's never a straight line.
Yeah,
it's not linear. If you follow the model, it would be, denial. I think we've all heard this before.
The grief stages.
Yeah, the grief stages, the denial, and then the anger, and and it's kind of like a wave. But I think some of the strategies, as you mentioned, that we were using in the last few days was to obviously pay enormous amounts of attention to her. And I think she was kind of wondering,
what's going on?
This is more than normal.
Too much,
Yeah, but she knew something was wrong, and our other dog knew that there was something wrong. But of course, an animal doesn't really have consciousness of, I'm going to pass away. They don't have that
same understanding as us. Yeah.
So some of the strategies that we were using, and every family, every person might have their own different strategies. My son, who lives a couple of hours away, when we told him that, our little Maggie was on the decline, he said, I want to come out. I want to see her one more time. And he was happy to see her. And, we had dinner and pardon me, and whatnot. And then he just kind of sat on the couch with her alone, and we kind of gave him a bit of time.
Just his space too,
the space where he can have his own time with her, his memories of her. Now, he wouldn't have been, in the household. He's older now and went off to university and everything. Yeah. My daughter, though, has a really strong connection. She's a little younger. And we gave her one of the things that we gave her the option to come to the vet and see her in her last moments. And she said, no, I want to say goodbye here in the home. And we gave her some time, and she held her and petted her and kissed her and then said, I'm going to be okay. Yeah. Now, as my wife and I left left our house, we knew that our daughter was on her own, and part of us said, maybe she should just come for the car ride.
Yeah, and maybe
but she said clearly, I'm good. I want to stay here.
Yeah.
And then she was processing it without any other eyes on. not that she would feel that we were
she needed
judging.
her own space to
Absolutely.
grieve. Exactly.
Yeah. Another strategy, though, I think, as I mentioned, now that Maggie has passed a few weeks ago, is that we'll set a night, and rather than watching a Netflix show or something, which we tend to do,
go through her pictures.
we're gonna have a little 20-minute slideshow. We can pause it and say, "Oh, remember when?"
Yeah.
And I think it will bring the family a little closer together in that moment, and the one connection there is the
and
dog.
you're also sort of honoring her memory in a positive light, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, I feel like it doesn't matter how many dogs you have in your house. Even if one is gone, that emptiness is there.
It is.
Because they're following you around.
It is.
It's very different than having humans who love you, right? Animal love is unconditional.
Absolutely.
And I think for me, if I ever had to, when that time comes, I think the biggest thing I'm going to miss is that tip, 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 tip right behind me, following me around, booping me for food. So I can't imagine that might be, Maggie might have had her own quirks and stuff,
Absolutely. Well, my wife and I were talking about this. Every time that one of us would wake up in the middle of the night, even just to roll over or, have to use the washroom or something, it might be 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. But as soon as we move, Maggie she was pretty small, so she could lay at the foot of on our bed.
Yeah.
And she would pop her head up. It was almost like she was making sure we were okay. And we would give her that little pat
to make
and
sure
she'd be okay. She knew we were okay. So it's almost like she was protecting us, right?
That is so cute.
And the first night, of course, wake up, I'm sitting on the side of the bed and I go to reach over and she's not there.
Yeah.
And it got me right in that moment, and I choked up a little bit. And my wife, it's dark in the room, and she wakes up and she says, "Yeah, I know. She's not here." But I'm not the type of person to say time will heal everything.
Yeah.
I think over time, it becomes more of we're not thinking about those last few days of the sickness. We're thinking about all of the good times, like you're right. We have the hardwood floors and you could hear her. And it used to be tip, 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 tip. And in the last few days, it's been like tip,
tip,
tip, tip,
Yeah.
And that sound is still with me.
Yeah.
It's all of our senses that,
I can't imagine. I don't think you'll ever forget her footsteps.
No.
It's sort of like deafening to the ear, even when they go sick, right? I mentioned I have a toddler, and I kind of feel like they're the same.
A little bit.
So usually, there's toys all over the place, and the moment they're sick, there's no mess. And I realized I didn't like my house like that. I liked it messy because that meant they're healthy. That meant they're playing around.
Yeah.
That meant that, I didn't have to worry about them.
Yeah.
But the moment it's too silent, the moment they're not getting into trouble is when I'm worried. Because to me, that means okay, you're not being yourself. What's going on, right?
So if it's funny you would say that, because my daughter has brought 2 cats into our house. She was living outside of the house, and then she went back to school about 18 months ago, and she came back to live with us. And she brought first one cat, and she calls it the orange cat.
The orange cat.
The menace. But if he's not being a menace, she wonders if there's something wrong with him.
Something wrong, yeah.
And she gets concerned. So when he's menacing, he's a good little guy. And she has another one who's much different temperament.
Yeah.
Very quiet, very shy. Will let you pet for a moment or two, but spends a lot of time on her own. And she's a long hair black cat, beautiful cat. And the interesting thing is if the black cat, Kirby, if she starts running around, my daughter's like, there's something wrong with her. Whereas if the orange one isn't running around, she thinks there's something. So we get used to those patterns, right?
Yeah.
And it is interesting because when you see a spike in a pattern, like they're way more energetic or they're way less energetic, sort of hyper aroused or hypo aroused, you start to wonder. And that's when we started to know that our little Maggie was not great, because her energy level just went so far down.
Yeah.
I would come home from work and she would normally pop her head up. She'd be sitting on the couch and pop her head up and stand up and want to really, and when I came home that one day, and it was just like, she just kind of looked at me and looked away, and I thought, oh my gosh, she was feeling it. But
and I think it's really important to understand when the right time is to let go.
Yes.
Right? Because
absolutely.
Of course we're human, we get attached, and I've seen some people sort of just drag that pet's life out. And I know it's out of love. I know it's that, it's hard to let go. But I think it's really important to see your pet and look at them and see what they would want. Like if we were in their shoes, right? And we felt the pain that they felt. Because I know even culturally, because a lot of our community believes that, as long as the dog is eating, don't put them down, right? But it all depends. Are they paralyzed? Are they unable to, control their bowel movements? Are they suffering, right? It's the suffering that we're trying to minimize. So I think that's what I want to emphasize on, is that know your pet, know their body language, know when it's time to let go. Because that's also an act of love, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. Our vet, when I brought her in 4 or 5 days before the actual day of the euthanasia, she said, I can give you all the options. We can do all of these tests. But she said, from my 30 years of experience as a vet, this is the end. I'm just telling you. Yeah. And now some people might not have appreciated that, but I did. Yeah. And she wasn't trying. I said, money's not a problem. Yeah. But if it's going to be hundreds or thousands of dollars of testing, and then maybe surgery or some medications, and then the dog lives 2 more weeks, you might be beating yourself up a little. Oh boy, I spent $3,000, $4,000, $5,000. Yeah. And I've been there with another dog. This is our 5th dog. Wow. Over my life. Yeah. And I knew clearly that when the vet said, in my experience, this is it. Just a whole combination of how the dog was acting on the vet table, the breathing, the heart, They know they're experienced professionals. And I appreciated that. Yeah. I also appreciate an honest opinion from a professional. Be transparent. Yeah. Yeah. It's there's no point of beating around the bush, and you're eventually going to be doing that. It's just a matter of 2 weeks or today. Yes. Right? That's right. So yeah, money is never the option. It's more so what your beloved pet is going through. Yes. Right? Like I can tell, because, dogs are 90% body language, right? The 10 is bark. So it's I can tell when, even if they're walking funny. Yes. Right? Like I'm always on them. And Dexter is prone to a lot of ear infections, and I know when he's just constantly going at his ear and he's sniffing his paw, I know something's off, right? So now it's for Tyson, I'm a little bit more alert, just because his morning routines, normally when I would wake up, he would wake up right away. Now I'm noticing he kind of sits there and he needs some time. Yeah. And it's like, I'm understanding of it, but then my heart breaks a little. I'm like, oh, 2 weeks ago you were preppy, and now it's like, what's going on, right? So that's pretty much what we were here to talk about. If there's anything else you want to add into our conversation that people should know. Yeah, I think that one of the things is, we talked earlier about how people process grief, is that we wouldn't want to judge how another person might be reacting to the death of that dog. And if I could just share something quickly, I have a friend who kind of told me this story about, his mom and dad were in their 80s. you can see I'm a pretty old guy. They were in their 80s. They'd been married for 63 years. It was unbelievable, right? And they had this little dog that they had bought. And I want to say the dog was around 2 years old.
Yeah.
And it was unfortunate that his father passed from natural causes, and it wasn't drawn out. It was, if anything, it might sound strange, but it was a nice, peaceful death for his father.
Yeah.
And his mom, of course, grieved, lost her husband of 63 years, and that would be fully understandable, and everybody would expect that. But my friend said his mom took some time and then bounced back because mom was in an assisted living place, and she for a few months wouldn't go down to the dining area, and wouldn't play cards with her friends and shuffleboard and all that stuff. And tried to encourage him, and his wife tried to encourage her. And he said eventually, in his words, she bounced back.
Yeah.
But then, this is an unfortunate story. Not too long after, maybe within a couple of months, his mom was walking the dog near a very busy street.
Oh, no.
And the dog slipped the leash and ended up, unfortunately, being killed, hit by a car. And in his own mind, he said, my friend said, I understood the grief that my mom went through when his dad passed, and it took time, but she bounced back. But when the dog, and that was very tragic, very sudden, very young dog, beautiful dog, that mom took even more time. Mm-hmm. And I said to my friend, because I knew he understood it, it wasn't so much the death of the dog. It really was, but it wasn't all that. It was the connection to the husband. Mm-hmm. That now she was feeling very alone. The
last thread.
She was feeling that was the last thread, exactly. Yeah. And feeling very alone, although my friend and his brothers would say, Mom, you've got us. That's not really what a person necessarily needs to hear. You've got us. You're not alone, but she's feeling in that moment alone. Let's validate that and say, this is going to be hard, but we're here for you when you need us.
And that's one of the biggest mistakes we all make is that to be present with that individual and their loss. Mm-hmm. We're always trying to show them what they do have and what, we're always trying to distract them away from their grief. So it's also like you were mentioning that it was that last thread, that last connection with the husband. But I also feel there might be a little bit of guilt as well involved because she was walking the dog, right? So there was so much happening in her mind. She lost her husband. Now she lost this dog. And now she feels guilty that maybe she was thinking about, maybe I could have done this. Maybe I could have done that. And for somebody to come in like, but you have us. It completely dismisses that process of emotions, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. So I think it's that's one of the things that everybody should learn, whether you're grieving a human or a pet, that when someone is going through the loss is to just remain with them in that loss and to validate their feelings.
And I think one of his other friends said, why would your mom be more upset about the death of the dog than her husband? And my friend would have said, it is the last thread. But somebody who hasn't had a pet before,
they wouldn't know.
They don't know.
No.
They don't know how that pet becomes such a part of you.
Yeah. And honestly, that it's that unconditional love that we receive from them. No matter what. With my dogs, I sometimes get upset because, they get into stuff they're not supposed to. But that love never changes. Their love towards you is always going to be that same intensity, same excitement. Of course, if you treat them right. You know what I mean? Like it's not, it's you'll see a behavior change if you treat them poorly.
Yes.
But, if you treat them right, like my dogs love cuddling. So no matter even if I take a nap on the floor, they'll come and cuddle right next to me.
That's great.
And it's the best feeling of the world, right? Like if I'm cold, they're like my heating furnaces. So yeah, so it's really important to.
It's interesting that you mentioned that, because if you're laying down and they lay down with you, I call out a little bit of mirroring, and there's science behind the fact that petting a dog or a cat
actually
or what other pet
stress.
you have, it absolutely lessens your stress, like at a brain and nervous system level. It's
really
undoubted, and you and
is.
I both can attest to that. People who have never had a pet, they might say, I don't know that petting my dog's head is going to help me if I've had a really bad day at work. Okay, it doesn't make the bad day at work go away.
Yeah.
But it actually physically brings you to a state of calm. I actually write about that a little bit in my book. Yeah.
Oh, wow. Okay. Yeah.
So.
Well, we better read that book then, I guess. Where is that book available?
The book is available on Amazon. And the company that published it for me is called Friesen Press.
Okay.
And it's available there too. It is on Amazon. But if anybody is local in the GTA and would love a copy, I can just mail you one, because it would be cheaper that way. I have hard copies myself. Yeah.
I'll put all that information in our little post.
I appreciate that.
Well, thank you so much for making time for us today.
This
was a really good conversation.
Thank you.
And I'm hoping we have more.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you for listening to our very first podcast episode on pet loss. We encourage you to reach out to your family, friends, or a medical professional if you are experiencing any kind of loss or feeling low. Please feel free to share any topics you would like us to cover in the comment sections. Until next time.